I was teaching an 8-year-old how to fall properly when her mother walked out onto the porch and said the sentence that ended my quiet, uncomplicated life. Teach me how to fall like that too. I laughed because I thought she meant the skateboard. She didn't. Not really. Not underneath it. My name is Elliot Vance. I'm 35. I build custom furniture out of a converted garage 2 streets over from where I grew up, and before that afternoon, my biggest concern in life was whether the maple slab I'd been drying for 4 months had cured evenly. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that from the start, because everyone always assumes there was some secret hunger driving me toward my neighbor's front yard with a skateboard under my arm. There wasn't. I was just a man who liked quiet streets, sawdust on his hands, and being left alone with his work. Then Harper Kirby showed up at my fence with a skateboard she couldn't ride and a question she'd clearly been building up the courage to ask for a week. Let me back up. I'd lived on Larkspur Lane for 6 years by then, in a small blue house with a garage I'd gutted and turned into a workshop because the noise didn't bother anyone and the light came in good from the west in the afternoons. I wasn't married. I'd been close once. A woman named Dana who I dated for 2 years before she decided that a man who found peace in sanding table legs for 6 hours straight wasn't exciting enough to build a future with. She wanted spontaneity. I wanted Tuesday nights that felt the same as Wednesday nights. We wanted different lives, and to her credit, she figured that out before we wasted more time pretending otherwise. That was 3 years before any of this. I'd made my peace with it. Mostly. The house next to mine had been empty for almost a year after old Mr. Petrosky passed. And then one gray October morning, a moving truck showed up, and a woman climbed out of a silver sedan with a little girl asleep in the back seat and a face that looked like she hadn't slept properly in longer than a year. I didn't introduce myself right away. That's not really how I work. I figure people will come to you when they're ready, and forcing friendliness on someone who just moved into a new house with visible exhaustion under her eyes felt like the wrong kind of neighborly. Her name, I learned 2 weeks later from the mail carrier, who knew everything about everyone on that street whether you asked or not, was Noelle Kirby. 31, maybe 32. The little girl was Harper, 8 years old, quiet in the way kids get quiet when they've had to grow up around tension they didn't create. I saw them mostly in passing. Noelle walking Harper to the bus stop in a coat 2 sizes too big for the weather, like she was cold from somewhere the jacket couldn't reach. Harper sitting alone on their porch steps some afternoons, drawing in a notebook, not really looking up when I pulled into my driveway. I didn't think much of it beyond the ordinary sympathy you feel for new neighbors who seem to be carrying something heavy. Then, on a Saturday in late October, I was out front sanding down a porch rail I'd been meaning to fix for a month, and I heard the clatter of plastic wheels on concrete, followed by a thud, followed by a very small, very controlled voice saying a word she absolutely should not have known. I looked over. Harper was sprawled on the sidewalk in front of her house, a beat-up skateboard rolling away from her without its rider, both palms scraped pink. She didn't cry. That was the part that got me. She just sat there, examining her hands like she was doing quality control on the damage, jaw tight, refusing to let her face do anything her mother might see from the window. "You're going to want to load your weight forward next time," I said, before I'd really decided to say anything at all. "Right now you're leaning back like the board's going to bite you. It's not going to bite you. It's just going to dump you if you don't trust it." She looked over at me with the particular suspicion only an 8-year-old can generate toward an adult who hasn't been formally vetted. "You skateboard?" "Used to. Badly at first. Then less badly." "How long's it take to stop being bad at it?" "Longer than you want it to. Shorter than you're afraid of." She considered that with more seriousness than the sentence probably deserved, then looked down at her scraped palms again. "My dad said he'd teach me. He's not around anymore, though." I didn't ask what not around meant. Kids tell you what they want you to know, in the order they want to tell it, and pushing past that felt like the kind of mistake you don't get to take back. "Well," I said instead, "I'm around. And I've got about 15 years of falling off boards to draw from, if you want a second opinion." That was the whole conversation. I went back to sanding the rail. She picked up her skateboard, looked at it like it had personally wronged her, and went inside. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, there was a knock on my garage door while I was gluing up a drawer joint, and when I opened it, Harper was standing there with the skateboard held out in front of her like an offering. "You said you'd teach me." I said I was around if you wanted a second opinion. Same thing. I looked past her toward the Kirby house, half expecting to see her mother standing on the porch with the particular alarm mothers get when their kid wanders off to a strange man's garage. I didn't see anyone. "Does your mom know you're over here?" Harper's expression did something complicated, somewhere between guilt and defiance. "She's at work. She works Saturdays sometimes. So she doesn't know. I'm going to tell her tonight, after I already know how to do it. It'll be a good surprise instead of a scary one." I should have said no. I should have walked her back to her own porch and told her we'd figure something out once her mother was involved and aware and comfortable with the whole arrangement. Because that's what a responsible adult does when an 8-year-old shows up unsupervised at his door with a skateboard and a plan. Instead, I found myself saying, "All right, 10 minutes. And then you go home and tell your mom exactly what we did. No surprises, no secrets. Deal?" Deal. We didn't get much done in 10 minutes beyond me showing her how to stand on the board without immediately tipping it. But something about the way she listened, actually listened, absorbing every correction without arguing or sulking, told me this kid had more discipline in her than most adults I knew. When the 10 minutes were up, I walked her back to her own yard myself, mostly so there'd be no version of events where I was the mysterious man who lets neighborhood children vanish into his garage. That was how I met Noelle Kirby properly. Not on the porch, in her driveway, at 6:15 that evening, when she pulled in from work still wearing scrubs under an unzipped fleece, saw me standing there with her daughter, and went very, very still. "Harper," she said carefully, not taking her eyes off me. "Go inside for a second." "Mom, he's not weird. He's teaching me skateboarding. I told him I'd tell you tonight. This is me telling you." "Inside, baby." Harper went, throwing me a look on the way that clearly communicated this was not how the surprise was supposed to go. Noelle turned to face me fully once the door shut, arms crossed. And I understood in that moment that I was looking at a woman who had learned, somewhere along the way, to treat every unfamiliar man as a potential problem until proven otherwise. "I'm Elliot," I said. "I live next door. Your daughter showed up at my garage about 40 minutes ago with a skateboard and a plan I wasn't consulted on. I gave her 10 minutes of basic instruction in full view of the street and then walked her straight home. That's the entire story." Noelle studied me the way you'd study a stranger's math on a napkin, checking for the error you're sure has to be there. "She's 8. I know. She doesn't know you. She introduced herself 2 days ago when she wiped out in front of my house. I told her to lean forward next time instead of back. That's the sum total of our relationship until this afternoon." Something in Noelle's shoulders came down half an inch, though her arms stayed crossed. "She's not supposed to leave the yard without telling me. She said she was going to tell you tonight. That was apparently the plan. I told her the plan was wrong and she should have told you first, but I wasn't going to march an 8-year-old back to an empty house and abandon the whole thing either." I paused. "For what it's worth, I've got 2 nieces I've taught to ride bikes and 1 nephew who broke his wrist trying to skateboard off my back steps against my direct advice. I'm not a stranger to kids being reckless. I try to make sure the recklessness doesn't cost them anything permanent." Noelle's eyes moved over me again, slower this time, less like an accusation and more like an assessment. "You live in the blue house. 6 years now. Petrosky's old place is the yellow one, next to yours. That's the one you bought." I know whose house I bought, but there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth when she said it, gone almost before I registered it. "Look, I appreciate you not just letting an 8-year-old wander off with a strange man's blessing, but I'd rather know in advance next time. Before, not after. That's fair. I'll send her home if she shows up again without you knowing." "She's going to show up again," Noelle said, with the weary certainty of a mother who already understood her daughter's personality better than the daughter did. "She's been asking about that skateboard since her dad." She stopped herself, recalibrated. Since we moved. It matters to her. More than she'd probably tell you. I gathered that. Noelle exhaled, and for the first time the exhaustion I'd noticed in her from a distance came into focus up close. Not just tired from a long shift. Tired in a deeper, older way, the kind that lives behind the eyes long after the shift ends. If you're serious about teaching her, she said slowly, like each word cost her something, I'd want to be there. Not hovering. Just there. That seems like exactly the right amount of involvement for a stranger teaching your kid to fall off things safely. That got an actual laugh out of her, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected to produce one. Fall off things safely. Is that the technical term? It's the only term that matters, honestly. Everybody falls. The kids who get hurt bad are the ones nobody ever taught how to fall right. Noelle looked at me for a second too long after that, like the sentence had landed somewhere she hadn't expected it to. Then she nodded once. Saturday mornings. If that works for your schedule. It works. That's how it started. Not with anything dramatic. Just a woman deciding, cautiously, that the man next door with sawdust on his jeans wasn't a threat to her daughter, and a Saturday morning arrangement that neither of us called anything more than what it was. For the next month, every Saturday at 10, I'd walk over to the strip of empty sidewalk between our two driveways with a couple of boards and a bag of pads I dug out of my own garage from years I don't talk about much, and Harper would be there already, practically vibrating with impatience. And Noelle would be sitting on her porch steps with a coffee mug and a book she never seemed to actually read. She watched everything. I noticed that early. Not in a suspicious way anymore. Not like she was waiting for me to slip up, but in the specific, careful way of a person cataloging information she planned to need later. How I explained balance. How I corrected Harper's stance without making her feel stupid for getting it wrong. How I let her fall, over and over, without rushing in to save her from the sting of it, because the sting was the lesson. You're going to let her just keep eating pavement? Noelle asked me, the third Saturday, watching Harper go down for the fourth time in 20 minutes, popping back up each time a little less rattled. She's got pads on. She's not getting hurt. She's getting informed. I nodded toward Harper, who was already climbing back on the board without waiting for permission. Watch her hands when she goes down. Watch her instinct. Noelle watched. Harper wobbled, overcorrected, and went down again. But this time her arms came up automatically, rolling with the fall instead of bracing straight into it, absorbing the impact along her forearm instead of slamming her palm flat against the concrete. She's already doing it different than she was 3 weeks ago, I said. That's not luck. That's repetition building instinct. You can't shortcut that by protecting her from every fall. You can only make sure the falls teach her something instead of just hurting her. Noelle didn't say anything for a moment. When I looked over, her eyes weren't on Harper anymore. They were on me, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite name yet, something that looked almost like grief standing next to admiration, an uncomfortable pair of house guests sharing the same small room. That's a very tidy metaphor for a Saturday morning, she said finally, and there was an edge under the lightness, something I filed away without understanding. I build furniture for a living. I've had a lot of time alone with wood to think up tidy metaphors. That earned a real laugh, and the moment passed, and I told myself it was nothing. I want to say I fell for Noelle Kirby gradually, the way people always claim in stories like this, some slow unfolding over weeks of small moments. That's mostly true. But there was one particular Saturday, 5 weeks in, when the gradual thing sped up considerably, and it started with an argument I wasn't supposed to overhear. I'd shown up a few minutes early, boards under my arm, and I could hear Noelle's voice through the screen door before I reached the porch, low and tight in a way I hadn't heard from her before. I don't need you checking up on me, Ian. A pause. No, that's not what this is. This is you wanting a status report on how I'm managing without you, and I'm not giving you one. Another pause, longer, and when she spoke again her voice had gone very flat, very controlled, the tone of someone holding something together with both hands. She's fine. She's better than fine. She's got a whole life here that doesn't need your approval to keep existing. Silence. Then, quieter, almost to herself, "You don't get to decide that's not enough for her just because it wasn't enough for you." I stood at the bottom of the porch steps like a man who'd wandered into a room he had no business being in, unsure whether to knock, retreat, or announce myself loudly enough to end the conversation on my behalf. Before I could decide, the door opened and Noelle stepped out, phone still in her hand, face composed into something smooth and neutral that didn't match what I'd just heard through the screen. "Sorry," she said. "Harper's just finishing breakfast. Take your time." I hesitated, then added, "Because I've never been good at pretending I didn't hear something. You all right?" Her eyes flicked to me, sharp for a second, like she was deciding how much armor the question required. Then something in her seemed to loosen, just slightly. "That was Harper's father." "Oh, we split up a year and a half ago. He didn't want." She stopped, recalibrated the way she did sometimes, choosing the shorter, safer version of the truth. "He didn't want the life that came with staying. Not really. Not once it stopped being convenient." She looked out at the street. "He calls sometimes to ask if we're doing okay, but what he's actually asking is whether we've fallen apart yet without him. Whether he made the right call leaving." "Have you? Fallen apart?" Noelle looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that measures a person before deciding whether they've earned an honest answer. "No," she said. "Not the way he's hoping." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything clever. I just said, "Good." That seemed to land harder than a more polished response would have. Something in her face shifted, softened at the edges, and for a second I thought she might actually let the guard down all the way. Then Harper burst through the door with her helmet already half-buckled crooked, and the moment folded itself back up and put itself away, and we went back to being a skateboard instructor and a watchful mother sitting on porch steps. But I noticed something after that. Noelle started talking more. Not about anything heavy, not at first. Just small things. The hospital where she worked as a physical therapist, which explained her instant understanding of what I meant about falling correctly better than most parents would have grasped it. Harper's father, Ian, in scattered, careful fragments. How he'd been a good man on paper and a hard man to live inside of. How the marriage had ended not with a dramatic betrayal, but with a slow, mutual admission that he wanted a version of freedom that had no room in it for a wife and daughter who needed him steady. How she'd moved 3 states away partly for the job, and partly because staying in the old house felt like living inside a museum exhibit of a marriage that had already closed. I told her things too. About Dana, and the 2 years I'd spent trying to be interesting enough to keep, and the slow relief of realizing that being myself, unhurried and quiet and content with sawdust and Tuesday nights, wasn't a flaw that needed fixing, just a person that needed the right audience. Noelle listened to that the way she watched Harper fall, carefully, without rushing to smooth it over, letting the shape of the thing sit in the air until it had finished saying what it needed to say. "You don't seem like a man who's bitter about it," she said, one Saturday in late November, watching Harper roll slow, careful circles at the end of the driveway. "I'm not, mostly." She wanted a different life. Better she figured that out before we built one together and both got stuck in it. I glanced over. "You don't seem bitter either." "About Ian." "I'm working on it." A small, honest smile. "Some days I'm further along than others." "What's a bad day look like?" She considered the question seriously, the way she seemed to consider most things. "A bad day is when I catch myself explaining Harper's whole personality to him like he's a stranger who needs a briefing, and I realize he actually is one now, and I get angry at him for making himself a stranger to his own kid." She shook her head slightly. "A good day is today. Watching her figure out how to stay upright on that ridiculous board because some guy next door decided she deserved 15 years of falling off things wisdom for free. I do charge, actually. My rate's steep." "Oh yeah? What do I owe you?" I hadn't planned the next part. It arrived the way the honest things always did with her, faster than my better judgment could intercept it. "Dinner sometime. Not a payment. Just dinner. If you want it." Noelle went quiet for a second, long enough that I started composing the sentence I'd used to walk it back into something safer, something that wouldn't cost either of us anything. Before I could say it, she said, "I haven't done that." Since Ian. Not once. That's not a no. It's not a no. She looked toward Harper, who was too absorbed in her circles to be listening. It's a, let me think about it. Not because of you. Because of everything that isn't you. That's fair. Take whatever time the everything that isn't me requires. She smiled at that, small and real, and I decided I could survive on the strength of that smile for as long as the thinking about it took. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Saturday mornings that felt charged in a way they hadn't before. Both of us aware of the question sitting unanswered between us. Neither of us pushing it. Harper blessedly oblivious and increasingly good at ollies. Then, on the second Saturday of December, Noelle handed me a coffee I hadn't asked for and said, without any preamble, Friday. If you're still offering. I'm still offering. Good. Because I already told Harper's sitter. Very confident of you. I've had 2 weeks to think about it, Noelle said. I don't do things halfway once I've decided. I would come to learn, over the following months, exactly how true that sentence was, and exactly how much it would eventually cost both of us to find out. Friday came, and I picked her up in my truck instead of walking her the 60 feet between our houses, because some occasions deserve the ceremony of an actual car ride, even if the destination is 12 minutes away. She wore a dark green sweater and had her hair down instead of the practical ponytail I was used to seeing, and something about the change hit me harder than it should have for a woman I'd already spent a month and a half getting to know on porch steps. You look surprised, she said, catching my expression. I'm recalibrating. I didn't know you had hair below your shoulders. I thought it was contractually attached to that ponytail. It comes out for special occasions. Don't get used to it. We went to a small place downtown, the kind with candles that made regret look flattering and a menu that took itself slightly too seriously. And for the first hour we talked about nothing important. Her work, my current project, a piece I was building for a client who kept changing her mind about the wood stain. It was easy in a way I hadn't expected, easy the way the porch conversations had been, just with better lighting. Then, over dessert, Noelle set her fork down and said, "Can I ask you something and have you actually answer it instead of being tactful? I'll do my best. Why are you doing this? The lessons, the dinner, all of it. I've been trying to figure out your angle for 6 weeks and I can't find one. And that makes me suspicious because everyone has an angle." I thought about giving her the easy answer, the charming one. I didn't. Honestly, I think I liked being needed for something that mattered. Harper showed up at my garage with a broken skateboard and more determination than most adults I know, and something about that got past whatever I usually keep up. And then I met her mother, who watches her kid fall down over and over without flinching because she understands, better than most people, that the falling is how you learn not to break. And I found I wanted to know more about the woman who understood that. I paused. That's the whole angle. I don't have a better one hiding behind it. Noelle was quiet for a moment, turning her water glass slowly on the table. Ian used to say I overthought things, that I turned every simple moment into a lesson. Her eyes came up to mine. You just did the same thing, and it didn't feel like a criticism at all. It's not one. I think you understand something most people miss. That falling right is a skill, not an accident. That's not overthinking. That's just seeing clearly. Something shifted across her face, soft and unguarded, and for a second I thought she might reach across the table. Instead she said, quieter, I haven't let myself want anything this much in a long time. It's terrifying, actually. We can go slow. I don't think I know how to do slow. I told you. I don't do things halfway. She looked at me steadily. But I can do careful. Careful, I know how to do. Careful works for me. That was the beginning of the part of the story where things got harder, because careful, it turned out, was a much more difficult promise to keep than either of us expected. The trouble arrived, as trouble often does, in the form of a phone call neither of us saw coming. It was late January, 2 months into whatever Noelle and I had quietly become, when Ian Kirby decided that a phone call wasn't dramatic enough anymore and showed up in person, driving 3 states to stand in his ex-wife's driveway on a Saturday morning while I was in the middle of teaching Harper how to drop into the small skate ramp I'd built in my backyard over the holidays as an early birthday present nobody had officially sanctioned yet. I heard the car before I saw him, an unfamiliar SUV pulling too fast into the Kirby driveway, and I watched Noelle's whole body change the instant she recognized it. Not fear exactly, something closer to bracing, the physical posture of a person readying herself for weather she'd hoped wouldn't come. "Harper, go inside for a second," she said, voice even, though I could hear the effort underneath it. "Is that Dad?" Harper's face did something complicated. Hope and wariness tangled together in a way that made my chest hurt on her behalf. "Go inside, baby. I'll come get you in a minute." Ian Kirby got out of the SUV looking exactly like a man who'd spent a year and a half constructing a version of himself he was proud of and was now annoyed to find that version wasn't waiting for him at home. Tall, put together, the kind of expensive casual clothing that costs more than it looks like it should. He took in the skate ramp, the pads, me standing there with a skateboard under my arm like a man caught somewhere he had every right to be, but suddenly felt he needed to justify anyway. "Noelle," he said, and then his eyes cut to me. "And you are?" "Elliot Vance. I live next door." "He's teaching Harper to skateboard," Noelle said, before he could construct whatever assumption he was already halfway toward. "It's been going on for 2 months. It's good for her. Nobody told me about this. You don't get a briefing on every good thing that happens in her life, Ian. That's not how this works anymore." Ian's jaw tightened. He looked at me again, longer this time, an assessment I recognized because I'd been on the other side of exactly that look before, back when Noelle first sized me up in her driveway. "Can I talk to you? Alone?" This was directed at Noelle, but his eyes stayed on me a beat too long, a warning dressed up as a request. "Anything you want to say, you can say in front of Elliot," Noelle said, and something in her voice had gone very steady, very certain, in a way I hadn't heard before. Ian's composure cracked, just slightly. "Fine. I'll say it in front of him, then. I don't love the idea of some guy I've never met spending every Saturday with my daughter. He's a good neighbor who's taken an interest in her because she showed genuine interest first. That's the whole story." "Is that the whole story?" Ian looked between us, and whatever he saw in that look apparently confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Or is my daughter learning skateboarding tricks while her mother's dating the guy who teaches her?" The word dating landed in the yard like a dropped plate. Noelle's face flushed, not with embarrassment, I realized after a second, but with anger, controlled and precise. "That is not your business anymore. You gave up the right to have opinions about who I see when you decided this life wasn't the one you wanted. I have every right to have an opinion when it involves my daughter. Then have an opinion about your daughter. About the fact that you call twice a month and act like that's parenting. Don't hide behind concern for Harper to disguise the fact that you don't like seeing that I'm okay without you." Ian's face went through several expressions in quick succession, landing finally on something tired and a little defeated. "That's not what this is." "It's exactly what this is." Noelle's voice softened, just slightly, the anger giving way to something more exhausted. "You left because staying felt too small for you. You don't get to come back a year and a half later and decide it's too small for me, too, just because I found a version of it that fits." I stood there through most of this saying nothing, because it wasn't my argument to have, but when Ian's eyes came back to me, sharp and searching for a reaction, I decided silence had done its job. "For what it's worth," I said evenly, "the lessons started before anything else did. And they started because your daughter showed up at my door with a skateboard and a plan. Everything after that is between me and Noelle, and it's careful, and it's slow, and it's none of your concern unless Noelle decides it is." Ian looked at me for a long moment, and something in his expression suggested he wanted to be angrier than he actually had the energy to be. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said finally, quieter now, and there was something almost like a warning in it. Or maybe just bitterness dressed up as one. "She'll pull you in slow and then decide it's too settled, too quiet, and she'll be gone before you understand what happened." "Ian." Noelle's voice cracked slightly on his name, more hurt than angry now. I'm serious. I lived it. I know how it starts feeling like safety and ends feeling like a cage. That's not fair, Noelle said, quiet and furious at once. You didn't leave because I made you feel caged. You left because you never learned how to sit still long enough to find out whether staying could feel like something else. Ian didn't have an answer for that. He stood in the driveway for a moment longer, looking like a man who'd rehearsed a different version of this confrontation and was now standing in the wreckage of the one that had actually happened. Then he said, quieter, I should see Harper before I go. She's inside. Knock first. She's had a confusing morning. He went. Noelle and I stood in the yard in the silence he left behind, the skateboard still in my hand, the whole scene feeling suddenly very loud in its aftermath. I'm sorry, Noelle said finally. You shouldn't have had to stand through that. I didn't mind standing through it. I minded watching him say something true enough to hurt you. Her eyes came up to mine, surprised. Which part was true? The part about it starting to feel like safety. I set the skateboard down against the ramp. That part's true. I don't know yet whether the rest of it is. Noelle was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again her voice had gone smaller, more honest than I'd heard it since the first night on her porch. I've been so careful not to let this become something that could hurt Harper if it fell apart. So careful I haven't let myself really ask what I want out of it beyond careful. She looked at me. I don't know how to answer Ian's fear without lying to you a little. Because there's a version of me that's scared he's right. That I'm the kind of person who finds peace and then panics because peace feels unfamiliar. Are you panicking right now? No, she said, and something in the certainty of it seemed to surprise her as much as it did me. That's the strange part. I'm not. Ian left 20 minutes later, after a short, quiet conversation with Harper that left her subdued for the rest of the afternoon in a way that told me exactly how complicated her feelings about her father really were. He didn't come back to the yard before he drove off. I watched his SUV pull away from my own driveway, where I'd retreated to give them space, and I felt something in my chest that I recognized, uncomfortably, as the beginning of caring about outcomes I didn't fully control. The weeks after that were quieter, but not in a peaceful way. Noelle pulled inward, just slightly, the way people do when an old fear gets confirmed loudly enough to echo. She still came to Saturday mornings. She still laughed at my terrible metaphors. But there was a new carefulness in her, a second layer over the first, and I understood without her having to explain it that Ian's visit had reopened a door she'd been working hard to keep shut. It was Harper, in the end, who forced the conversation neither of us had been brave enough to start. It happened on a Saturday in February, unseasonably warm, the kind of day that tricks everyone into thinking spring has arrived early. Harper had graduated from the driveway to the small ramp weeks before, and that morning she was attempting her first real drop-in, the moment where a rider commits to gravity fully instead of easing into it. She'd been building up to it for 2 weeks, circling the top of the ramp, losing her nerve, circling again. You don't have to do it today, I told her, for probably the 5th time that morning. I know I don't have to. Harper's jaw was set in the exact expression her mother got when she decided something. I want to. All right. Remember what we talked about. Weight forward, knees soft, trust the board. What if I fall? You're gonna fall. Probably more than once. That's not the part that matters. What's the part that matters? I glanced at Noelle, sitting on the porch steps with her coffee, watching with the particular intensity she reserved for these moments. The part that matters is what you do after you fall. Whether you get back up the same way, or whether you get back up a little smarter than you went down. Harper considered this with her usual seriousness, standing at the top of the ramp, board under her feet, hesitating in that specific way that precedes either a great leap or a great retreat. Then, without any further warning, she dropped in. She fell. Of course she fell. Nobody lands their first drop-in. But she fell exactly the way I'd taught her, rolling with the impact instead of fighting it, arms coming up automatically, absorbing the hit along her forearm and shoulder instead of catching herself wrong. She was up before I could even move toward her, grinning through the sting of it, already climbing back to the top of the ramp. Did you see that? She called. breathless. I fell right. You fell perfect, I said, and I meant it in a way that went beyond skateboarding, though I don't think either of us realized that yet. She tried again, fell again, got up again, a little steadier each time, and on the fourth attempt she rode it out clean, wobbling but upright, all the way to the bottom of the ramp, arms out for balance, face lit up with the specific joy of a kid who's just proven something to herself that no adult could have proven for her. Noelle stood up from the porch steps so fast her coffee nearly went over. She crossed the yard in a way I'd never seen her move before, not the careful, measured walk I'd gotten used to, but something faster, looser, propelled by something she wasn't bothering to control. She scooped Harper up before the board had even finished rolling to a stop, laughing and crying at the same time in a way that made my own throat go tight watching it. "You did it, baby. You did it." "I fell 4 times first," Harper said, muffled against her mother's shoulder. "I know. I watched every single one." Noelle pulled back to look at her daughter's face, brushing hair out of her eyes. "You know what I noticed? You got up faster every time. You weren't scared of the falling by the end. You were just scared of not trying." Harper nodded, solemn, the way she did when something important was being said to her. "Elliot taught me that falling's not the bad part." "I know he did." Noelle looked up at me then, over her daughter's shoulder, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen before, something that looked almost like the moment right before a decision gets made. "I've been watching him teach you that for 4 months now." Harper wriggled free, already moving to retrieve her board for another attempt, leaving Noelle and me standing in the yard in the particular quiet that follows a small miracle. Noelle wiped her eyes, half laughing at herself for crying over a skateboard trick, and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything, because if you interrupt me, I might lose my nerve." "Okay." She took a breath. Ian was wrong about a lot of things that day in the driveway, but he said one thing that's been sitting in my chest for weeks, and I think I owe you the honesty of telling you what it is. She glanced toward Harper, who was absorbed in resetting at the top of the ramp, out of earshot. "He said I'd pull you in slow and then decide it was too settled. And every day since, I've been terrified he's right, because that's exactly what I did to him. Except I don't think that's actually what happened with him at all. I think what happened is I finally stopped performing a version of contentment I didn't actually feel, and he mistook my honesty for restlessness." "Okay," I said again, carefully, because she'd asked me not to interrupt, and I was doing my best to honor that. "With you," Noelle continued, "I'm not performing anything. I'm not managing a feeling to keep the peace. I watch you teach my daughter that falling down is just information, not failure, and I think that's the first time in years I've felt like someone was building something with me instead of just tolerating the parts of me that were inconvenient." Her voice wavered slightly. "I'm not scared this is going to feel too settled, Elliot. I'm scared it's going to feel like exactly what I want, and then something's going to take it away, because that's what's happened every other time I've let myself want something this much." I let the silence sit for a second, making sure she'd finished before I said anything. "Can I talk now?" A small, wet laugh. "Yeah, go ahead. I'm not Ian. I'm not going to wake up one day and decide the quiet Saturday mornings and the porch coffee and the kid who falls right are too small for me. That's not a fear I have to manage, because it's not a temptation I feel. Quiet has never been the enemy for me. It's the whole point." I stepped closer. "And I don't think you're the kind of person who gets bored of good things. I think you're the kind of person who learned to brace for good things ending, because they kept ending on you before you were ready. That's not the same as restlessness. That's just a kind of learned falling." Noelle's eyes filled again, and this time she didn't try to laugh it away. "That's a very tidy metaphor for a Saturday morning. I told you, lots of time alone with wood." She stepped forward and kissed me then, unhurried, certain in a way that erased whatever careful, measured version of this we'd both been practicing for 4 months. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine for a second, the way people do when a decision has just settled somewhere permanent. "Harper's going to have opinions about this," she murmured. As if summoned, Harper's voice rang out from the top of the ramp. Finally, I've been waiting for that since Christmas. Noelle pulled back, laughing properly now, mortified and delighted in equal measure. Since Christmas? How long have you been watching us like this was a television show? You guys are so obvious, Harper called back, already dropping into another run, landing it cleanly this time, arms out, grinning the whole way down. I fell right, and you guys finally kissed. Best Saturday ever. I want to tell you the rest of it moved easily after that. But the truth is easy was never really the shape of our story. It was more like the falling itself. A little stumble, a correction, a small crash, a steadier landing, over and over, until eventually the whole thing just felt like the way we walked. Ian took longer than either of us expected to come around. Not because he was a villain in this story, though I've told it that way at times when I wanted a cleaner narrative. He was just a man who had made one big decision he still wasn't sure about, watching another man quietly build the life he'd walked away from. And I think some part of him needed to grieve that before he could accept it. He called Noelle less often after that Saturday in the driveway. And when he did call, the questions changed. Less are you managing, more how's she doing in school, the ordinary questions of a father instead of the loaded ones of a man auditing his own decision. It took the better part of a year, but eventually he showed up to one of Harper's competitions, sat in the stands 2 rows behind us without making a scene, and afterward shook my hand in the parking lot and said, "She talks about you like you hung the moon." I used to hate that. I don't anymore. I told him that was probably the most useful thing either of us would ever say to the other, and he laughed, surprised into it, and something between us settled into something workable after that. Not friendship. Something more like a truce 2 men reach when they both love the same kid enough to stop needing to win. Noelle and I didn't rush the rest of it either. Not because we'd lost our nerve, but because we'd both learned, the hard way, that the things worth having are worth building slow enough that they hold. We spent that whole spring the way we'd spent the winter, Saturday mornings on the ramp, Sunday dinners that started as just the 3 of us, and gradually filled up with more chairs as the neighborhood got used to seeing my truck parked in her driveway on weeknights too. Harper started calling me by my first name less and Elliot more like it was a title instead of a name, which I understood, without either of us discussing it, to be its own kind of promotion. The proposal happened at the top of that same ramp, almost exactly 2 years after the day Harper landed her first drop-in. I told Noelle I wanted to show her something I'd built, which wasn't exactly a lie, because I had spent 3 weekends quietly reinforcing the ramp's coping and repainting the deck a deep evergreen that matched the sweater she wore on our first date, though I never told her that was the reason. Harper knew. Harper had known for 2 weeks, which was, in retrospect, an enormous risk given her complete inability to keep a secret about anything that excited her. But she held it together admirably, only nearly ruining it once by asking Noelle at breakfast whether she liked surprises that happen outside near the ramp, which Noelle, thankfully, chalked up to ordinary 8-year-old strangeness. I asked Noelle to climb to the top of the ramp with me that evening, the 2 of us standing where Harper had once stood shaking with nerve before her first drop in, and I told her that I'd learned more about falling correctly from watching the 2 of them than I ever had from 15 years of skating badly on my own. I told her that I didn't want Careful anymore, not because Careful had failed us, but because it had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had let us build something steady enough to stop needing so much caution. Then I got down on one knee at the top of a plywood ramp in my own backyard, which is a genuinely terrible place to propose from a structural integrity standpoint, and asked her to marry me. Harper, who had been hiding behind the fence the entire time in a manner that fooled absolutely nobody, let out a shriek loud enough that 2 neighbors came out onto their porches to see what had happened. Noelle said yes before I'd even finished the sentence, which she still claims was strategic, because she didn't trust me to phrase the rest of the question as well as I'd phrased the first part of it. We got married the following spring, in the backyard, next to the ramp, because it felt wrong to do it anywhere else. She wore green because she said the sweater from our first dinner had started the whole thing, and she wasn't about to abandon a tradition that worked out that well for her. Harper walked her down what amounted to about 20 feet of grass between the porch and the ramp, crying harder than either of us expected, and told everyone at the reception afterward that she had personally arranged the entire marriage by wiping out on a sidewalk at exactly the right moment in front of exactly the right stranger, which, honestly, is not far from the truth. Harper is 12 now, sponsored by a local skate shop for junior competitions, faster and braver on that ramp than I've ever been in my life, and she still, to this day, introduces me to strangers as the guy who taught me falling's not the bad part, which I've decided is the best compliment I've ever received about anything, better than any review my furniture has ever gotten. She calls Noelle's careful, watchful presence on the porch steps quality control, a phrase she picked up from me years ago and has never let go of. And some mornings I still catch Noelle sitting there with a mug of coffee and a book she isn't reading, watching her daughter drop into that ramp with the same fierce, protective attention she brought to it that very first Saturday. Except now there's no fear underneath it. Just pride, uncomplicated and whole. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and Noelle's reading in the chair by the window and Harper's asleep down the hall, I think about that first Saturday, about a scraped-up kid refusing to cry in front of her own window, and a mother who watched her fall from a porch step with more courage than she probably knew she had at the time. I think about how one small offer, a 15-minute lesson I nearly didn't give, standing there with a sanding block in my hand, and every reasonable excuse available to just mind my own business, turned into an entire life I didn't know I was missing until it arrived on my doorstep with scraped palms and a stubborn, determined face. Noelle still says it sometimes, half joking, half not, usually late at night when the day's been long and the guard comes down easier than it used to. Teach me how to fall like that too. And I tell her the same thing every time. She already knew how. She'd just been waiting on a porch step for years for someone to remind her that falling isn't the part anybody's supposed to be afraid of. The part that matters, the only part that ever really mattered, is what you do once you're back on your feet. So tell me, have you ever had a small, ordinary moment quietly turn into the beginning of your whole life? A stranger's kindness, a passing comment, an afternoon you almost talked yourself out of? And have you ever watched someone teach your child something so simple it seemed almost silly, only to realize much later that they were actually teaching both of you? Let me know in the comments. And if this one got you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.